All right, well, good evening, everybody. Y'all go ahead and turn to the book of Esther. Turn to the book of Esther. This is, if you can believe it, our final class for this class quarter. So next Wednesday, we're going to have our singing night, and then Sunday, we're going to begin a brand new slate of classes. So this is going to be our last time in this study together, and I really hope you guys have gotten a lot out of this study. This has been really, really meaningful for me. I've enjoyed studying Nehemiah. I've enjoyed studying Esther. My favorite part of this was studying Ezra. Ezra gets overlooked. Her uncle, her cousin, there we go. You almost got me too. What are you doing to me? That happens again and again and again. I don't know why it does. We are just so convinced that Mordecai is her uncle. Okay, so we see she's obedient, she's beautiful, virtuous, courageous, bold. What else do we see in Esther when you think about her? Unselfish. All right, very good. Now, to your credit, you're probably thinking about this because you know how the story ends, but usually we don't think about how, really, at the end of the day, I don't think that's a very fair estimation of Esther, at least not at the beginning of her story. Words like courageous and bold and virtuous are not going to describe the woman that we see in this book through the beginning chapters. And that's how we think of her, but that's really not what we see. We kind of have to strip away some of that whitewash. I also want to think about this too. How do we describe the search for the new queen? When you're talking to kids in Bible class and you say the king was looking for a new queen, what do we call that? It was a what? It was a beauty pageant. That's exactly right. They all got up there and, did their talent. Some sang and, they danced on one foot. I don't know. It was a beauty pageant, right? And I want to ask you, is that a very fair characterization of what's going on in the book of Esther? Not really at all. What we find when we dig into this story, here we go, is a tale of indulgence, lust, and sensuality, and as Paul would say, many such things as these. Understand that the book of Esther is not about a beauty pageant. It's about something ungodly and sensual, and it's about Esther's transformation, and a very, very important transformation. So the first sense that we get that the book of Esther isn't quite as G as we might like to think it is in Esther 1, verses 10 through 12. I want you to see this. Esther 1, verse 10 through 12. On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, that's how it should be said, Zathar, Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and the princes, for she was beautiful. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. Then the king became very angry, and his wrath burned within him. I want to ask you, are there any clues in here that would tell us that this story is not as G-rated as we like to make it out to be? Yes, so it starts with a bunch of men who are drinking and have become merry with wine, which is the beginning point for all virtuous acts, right? So they're drinking a lot, and what else? What else gives us a clue that this isn't quite as virtuous as we like to make it out to be? It might insinuate nakedness, and I guess you could read this and you could think it's perfectly fine. He wants her to come fully clothed just because she's beautiful. But when you have a bunch of drunk guys and you call your wife to display her beauty, I don't think that is necessarily going to be the most modest of situations. Maybe I'm out on a limb there, but I think that makes a little bit of sense, doesn't it? So you have a bunch of men who are drunk. They are focused on Vashti's beauty. And notice this as well. How does Vashti respond to this? She says no. Now, if her husband says, hey, I just want you to come hang out with these guys. I think you're really beautiful. I want them to see how beautiful you are. And if it's completely innocent in that way, you think she's going to say no to her king? The fact that she says no probably indicates that this was degrading, at least in my eyes. So all of this seems to indicate a certain degree of lewdness is at play with this request to Queen Vashti. And then we see a little bit more when we get into chapter 2. I want you to read chapter 2. Look at what it says in verses 1 through 16. This is where they're beginning this beauty pageant. It says, after these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's attendants who served him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king. Let the king appoint overseers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather every beautiful young virgin to the citadel of Susa, to the harem, into the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and let their cosmetics be given to them. Then let the young lady who pleases the king be queen in place of Vashti, and the matter pleased the king, and he did accordingly. Look at what it says in verse 8. So it came about, when the command and decree of the king were heard, and many young ladies were gathered at the citadel of Susa in the custody of Haggai, that Esther was taken to the king's palace, into the custody of Haggai, who was in charge of the women. Now the young lady pleased him, and found favor with him, so he quickly provided her with cosmetics and food, gave her 7 choice maids from the king's palace, and transferred her and her maids to the best place in the harem. Esther did not make known her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had instructed her that she not make them known. Every day Esther walked back and forth in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and how she fared. Now, when the turn of each young lady came to go into King Ahasuerus at the end of her 12 months, under the regulations for the women, for the days of their beautification were completed as follows: 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and the cosmetics for women. The young lady would go into the king in this way. Anything that she desired was given to her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go in the morning she would return to the second harem, to the custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not again go into the king unless the king delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. Now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, would go into the king, she did not request anything except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the women, advised. And Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus to his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Sorry that's a long passage, but there's a lot of stuff in there that indicates this isn't quite as virtuous as we might think. So what clues do you see in here that this isn't quite the beauty pageant it's made out to be? Okay, she's part of a harem. That word means something, doesn't it? Doesn't it? So you see that a little bit. What else? What clues do you see in here? Yeah. Yes, that's pretty clear, isn't it? We're going to see who pleases the king best. You're going to go in the evening and come back in the morning. That is indicating something, that she's going in the evening. It indicates, in my mind, that they're having sexual relations with each other. What else? What do you see in here? Yes, sir. So we're going to talk about that in a second, but it does raise the question of whether this is voluntary or involuntary. And you do have to wonder about that, especially living in this kind of civilization, which is not going to be like a champion of civil rights like it is in America. What else? Yeah. So they leave the harem and they go to where the concubines are. That also indicates that something has happened over the night. Notice also, it says multiple times that these young women are, who's in charge of them? Who's taking care of them? What kind of people? Eunuchs, right? In other words, men who cannot do certain things because something has happened to them. And so that indicates that they're being prized for something that these eunuchs will not put in danger. Also, do not miss this as well, that they choose the beautiful young virgins who are in Persia. So all of this is to say, don't think of this as a beauty pageant. This is something insidious. This is something lustful and lewd and really ungodly, where they go out and they grab all these beautiful young women and they're forced, I think, to spend a night with the king to see who pleases him the most. This is not a G-rated kind of story. Now, thinking about all of that, I have to ask the question, how do you feel about Esther? Mm-hmm. Okay, so she seems really timid here, right? And you feel for her in this situation because this is a really tough situation for her to be put in. What else? How do you feel about Esther? Okay, why do you think that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is one thing. We're going to talk about this more later, but both of you guys are hitting on it. Esther always does what everyone tells her to do. When the king tells her to do something, she does it. When Haggai tells her to do something, she does it. When Mordecai tells her to do something, she does it. Esther is a passive and timid person who just does exactly what she's told to do, which, by the way, I'm getting ahead of myself in my notes. You think that might be the reason why Ahasuerus likes her so much? After all, why is he looking for a new queen? Because Vashti isn't that kind of woman. She's not going to do exactly what he wants. She's going to stand up for herself. Esther seems to be the kind of person who says, hey, whatever you want me to do, I'm just going to go ahead and do it to make you happy. When Mordecai tells her to hide her heritage, that's what she does. When Haggai says, hey, you should take this to the harem, that's what she does. And so that's the kind of person she is. She is passive and timid and just does exactly what everyone tells her to do. It does raise the question, I do want to point out this, is this collection of ladies, is this voluntary or is it under compulsion? Now, to me it seems like this is something that is involuntary. Notice that it says in verse 3, let the king appoint overseers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather every beautiful young virgin to the citadel of Susa, to the harem, into the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who's in charge of the women, and let their cosmetics be given to them. So you get the idea. This is a royal decree that goes out. There are overseers who are told to go gather these women and bring them into what? Bring them into, C word, custody, right? And that's a word that maybe the translation is maybe I'm doing too much with it, but we use that word custody of involuntary stuff, don't we? We see that word custody again when you look down into verse 8. So it came about when the command and decree of the king were heard, and many young ladies were gathered to the citadel of Susa, into the custody of Haggai, that Esther was taken to the king's palace, into the custody of Haggai, who is in charge of the women. We also see the word custody again in verse 14. So, if you get a sense of what this civilization was like and how women were treated in this time, and you get a sense that this is a decree that goes out from the command to go gather these women, it really doesn't seem like this is a beauty pageant that Esther signed up for, or any of these young ladies signed up for. It kind of seems like these people went out, they grabbed the women they wanted to grab, they brought them to the king, whether they liked it or not. Now, how do you feel about Esther now? Yeah. No, Rahab? Okay, so she's doing God's purpose, but how do you feel about the decisions she's making? Because this is what we don't think about, right? Yes, she's been grabbed involuntarily, I think, and she's been brought into custody, and she's got all this pressure on her, and she's supposed to spend a night with the king, and she does spend a night with the king, and at the end of the contest, or the pageant, or whatever it is, she wins. What's that say about Esther? Rolla is my favorite person to have in Bible class. She had winning ways.
You can see a difference between her and Daniel, where Daniel makes seemingly a more public distancing of himself from what is expected of him, and she's conforming to whatever she's being asked to do.
Yeah.
You don't know for sure what all the things are.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. And I think what we have to conclude is, at the end of the day, it's kind of a mixed bag. We have to feel some sympathy for her. She is put in a very difficult situation. She's a young woman who's lost both of her parents. Let's not forget about that. And now the whole Persian Empire is forcing her, it seems, into this situation. And she's got to contend with whether or not she's going to agree to this lewd, lascivious contest or not. So we have to have some sympathy for her. It seems like she has no voice. But at the same time, we have to appreciate that she joins a host of Bible characters who were called to face trial and trouble and persecution and death for the sake of standing for what is right. And if anything, her story is less difficult than Daniel or Shadrach or Meshach and Abednego, Zerubbabel, Ezra, or Nehemiah. And we can throw Mordecai in there as well, because in chapter 3, under threat of death, he's going to be asked to bow down before Haman, and he says no, right? And so, yes, we feel for her, but at the same time, we have a Bible full of characters who are called to stand up for what's right and be virtuous even in the face of death. And Esther does not. She makes the wrong choice. Now, somebody may say, well, what is she supposed to do? How would you answer that? Okay, she made the wrong choice for the right reason, maybe so. My answer would be to that, what's she supposed to do? Well, why don't we go ask Daniel when he was told to not pray for 30 days? Why don't we ask Nehemiah when they said, hey, if you keep building this wall, we're going to come kill you? Why don't we ask Mordecai why he didn't bow down to Haman? And for that matter, why don't we ask Vashti? She's the one who said no to this king. And yeah, she paid a price for it, but she stood for what was right and what was virtuous, even in the face of pressure from this empire. Were you itching or raising your hand? I got you. Very good. What I want to say is, don't think for a second that Esther is left without a choice here. She has a choice, just as all of us. Yes. But that's exactly right. And like I said, she joins a host of other Bible characters who had to choose, am I going to do what's right and die, or am I going to do what's wrong and live? Yeah, that's exactly right. So don't tell me she doesn't have a choice. She does. But she makes the wrong choice. She engages in the contest, and she wins. I want to ask you, why did Esther make the wrong choice? Why go along with the contest? It's a Bible class answer, I guess. Her cousin told her to. Okay, maybe more. Hey, you were smart. You didn't say uncle. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and so Nathan Ward, he was here. He did our adult classes during VBS. He has a book written called God Unseen about Esther. And he in one of his chapters, he writes all about how all the language in the book of Esther, at least until she has her moment, talks about how everything is happening to her, right? And it just emphasizes the idea she's a passive person. Even like what you just pointed out is one of the examples he would use. These things are happening to her because she lets things happen to her. So it comes down to the idea she is kind of that passive and timid person who just goes with the flow. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. You do have to appreciate how difficult the situation is. It really is an intensely difficult situation. And that may be the reason. Maybe Esther makes the wrong choice because she wants to be queen. Maybe she wants to be married. Maybe she makes the wrong choice because she's simply scared. And that could be a very, very good reason. That could very well be the main reason. But really the thing that comes out in this story is that Esther's the kind of person that goes with the flow. She doesn't rock the boat. She does what she's told. And there you go. Esther's a passive person. She follows the rules. She lets things happen. She will not rock the boat. That's the kind of person she is. And that's what we see in this story. Esther is taken into custody and agrees to participate in the contest. Esther tells no one her heritage because Mordecai told her to. And when she goes to the king, she takes only what Haggai tells her to take. And I think we have to appreciate that up to this point, this approach, this passivity, has treated her really well. It's worked out well for Esther that she kind of just does what everyone tells her to do. And I think that's why Esther 4 is such an impressive moment for her. Because it's not just a moment when a Bible character does a good thing. It's a moment when a weak and passive woman decides who she's going to be. It's a moment where she has to choose between faith or going with the flow. It's a moment where she has to decide that she's going to do something that is going to cut sharply against her own grain. Now, some of you guys love to challenge people, and some of you guys love conflict, and you love to argue, and you love to go your own way. I can't possibly understand that kind of mentality because I ain't cut that way, and neither is Esther. She loves to just do what people want her to do. But she has to cut against the grain here, and that's what we see in Esther 4. This is Esther's moment where she is called to not just do something good, do something that goes against her very nature. In Esther 4 in verse 7, Mordecai told him all that happened to him and the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict which had been issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show Esther and inform her and to order her to go to the king to implore his favor and plead with him for her people. Hathach came back and related Mordecai's words to Esther. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and ordered him to reply to Mordecai, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court who is not summoned, he has but one law, that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter so that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. They related Esther's words to Mordecai. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish, and who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens also will fast in the same way, and thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. I love that moment from Esther because we finally see her say something that she never would have said before. I'm going to go break the law. I'm going to do exactly what this king has instructed me not to do, and if I die for it, I die for it. That's where she changes entirely. And so once chapter 5 begins, we begin to see this transformation in Esther. She becomes the kind of person who doesn't just go with a flow, but she stands up for her people, and she stands for what's right. It says in chapter 5 and verse 1, now it came about on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's rooms, and the king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace. And when the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, she obtained favor in his sight, and the king extended to Esther the golden scepter which was in his hand. So Esther came near and touched the top of the scepter. Then the king said to her, what is troubling you, Queen Esther? And what is your request? Even to half the kingdom it shall be given to you. Now there is something interesting that happens here. We see Esther do that one thing she's so scared to do. She goes when she has not been summoned. She risks her life, and she actually makes it into the presence of the king. And he agrees to let her have whatever she wants, even half the kingdom, which kind of speaks to the unstable nature of Ahasuerus, I think. But what happens here is interesting. She gets there. He tells her you can make your request. If you're Esther here, what request do you make? Don't kill the Jews. That's a pretty... But she doesn't make that request, does she? Look at what it says. If it pleases the king, may the king and Haman come this day to the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, bring Haman quickly, that we may do as Esther desires. So the king and Haman came to the banquet which Esther had prepared, and as they drank their wine at the banquet, the king said to Esther, what is your petition? For it shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to half the kingdom it shall be done. And so if you're Esther there, what request do you make? Don't kill the Jews. Is that the request Esther makes? She says, so Esther replied, my petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and do what I request, may the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king says. Now here's my question. Why doesn't Esther ask the king not to kill the Jews? Why does she plan a banquet? And then when he asks her again, she again doesn't ask him not to kill the Jews. Yes, sir. Yeah, okay, so maybe she's trying to manipulate him and using his appetites against him, which is something we see people doing all through the book of Esther. That's part of it, I think. Okay, she has faith in a bigger plan. In what way? Okay, so she has faith in God and she's willing to walk with that plan? Maybe so. I see it a little bit differently, but you could be right. I guess we're in the realm of speculation here. But as somebody who relates a lot to Esther, I see this a little bit differently than that, although you could be right. You probably are right. Let's just stick with that. You're about to teach Ezekiel. I mean, you're definitely right about this. As somebody who struggles with conflict, I recognize, I think, what Esther's doing here. Have you ever had one of those moments where you were required to stand up and you had your chance to say what needed to be said and you kind of lost your nerve? Does that resonate with anybody? Yes, ma'am. Oh, here we go. What kind of vegetable is she? Okay, sorry, off track. But I resonate with that, and maybe there's something going beyond, and she has a different plan, and maybe Mordecai's communicated to her and told her to do exactly this. Maybe that's what's happening. In my mind, the way I see it is she loses her nerve, and she's about to ask for something really big and really scary, and she's never really stood up for herself before, and she's scared to take that next step and say, hey, I want you to spare the Jews. And by the way, Haman, this guy that you just promoted, that you love, that you talk and drink with, he's the guy who wants to kill us. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. You see, I think, some hesitancy in there. Now, here's the really interesting thing about that. Esther's hesitation, if that is what it is, it nearly costs them everything. Because if you look at the way this story plays out, what happens after that first banquet in chapter 5? What does Haman go home and do? He goes home, talks to his wife, tells everybody about all the great things that he did, and then decides he's going to build a gallows and decides, I'm going to kill Mordecai tomorrow. And then at the beginning of chapter 6, he comes into the presence of the king so that he can ask for Mordecai to be killed that morning. And so I want you to understand that this hesitation on Esther's part, it nearly costs Mordecai his life, because she's got this banquet planned for later in the day. And so if everything stands as it's supposed to stand, they have their banquet, Haman goes home, makes his gallows, he's going to wake up in the morning, kill Mordecai, and then he's going to go to a banquet that night where Esther can finally make her request. That ain't going to work. But then, everything in the story of Esther turns at the beginning of chapter 6. During the night, the king could not sleep. So he gave an order to bring the book of records, the chronicles, that they were read before the king. It was found written that Mordecai had reported concerning Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who were doorkeepers, that they had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And the king said, what honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? Then the king's servants who attended to him said, "Nothing has been done for him." What happens is, even though Esther hesitates, God takes over the story. The king can't sleep that night. He learns about Mordecai. He makes Haman honor Mordecai before he can even make his request to kill him. And then the interesting thing is, if you read chapter 6, Haman has to lead Mordecai through the city square, doing all that stuff he feels so degraded by. And it even says he gets home, and as soon as he gets home, he doesn't have time to do anything else. They grab him, and they take him to the second banquet. And there at that banquet, the king learns that Haman is the enemy of the Jews, and Esther is a Jew. What happens in chapter 7 is, even though she hesitated, Esther follows through. And Mordecai is spared, and her people are saved. And so I want you to understand, by the time we get to chapter 7, Esther's transformation is complete. This cowardly, passive woman gathers enough courage to speak for herself and her cousin and her people, and she saves the day. And that transformation, this idea that she is now willing to not just go with the flow, she is willing to fight for her people, that sticks. And we see it even more when we look in chapter 9. I want you to read the beginning of chapter 9 with me. This is after Haman has been killed, and after they've sent out a new edict that says, hey, the Jews are able to defend themselves. And it says this: "In the 12th month, that is the month Adar, on the 13th day, when the king's command and edict were about to be executed, on the day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain mastery over them, it was turned to the contrary, so that the Jews themselves gained the mastery over those who hated them. The Jews assembled in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their harm, and no one could stand before them. For the dread of them had fallen on all peoples, even all the princes of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and those who were doing the king's business, assisted the Jews because the dread of Mordecai had fallen on them. Indeed, Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces, for the man Mordecai became greater and greater. Thus the Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying, and they did what they pleased to those who hated them. At the citadel in Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. In Parshandatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Poratha, Adaliah, Aridatha, Parmashta, appreciate the encouragement, Arisai, Aridai, and Vizatha, the 10 sons of Haman. I almost said something I shouldn't have said. The 10 sons of Haman, son of Habadatha, the Jews' enemy, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. On that day, the number of those who were killed at the citadel in Susa was reported to the king. The king said to Queen Esther, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman at the citadel in Susa. What then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? It shall even be granted to you, and what is your further request? It shall also be done." I have to think that Esther in her old self would have said, "That's great, that's wonderful, don't worry about it, I'm good." But Esther pushes further. Then said Esther, "If it pleases the king, let tomorrow also be granted to the Jews who are in Susa to do according to the edict of today, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows." So the king commanded that it should be done so, and an edict was issued in Susa, and Haman's 10 sons were hanged. The Jews who were in Susa assembled also on the 14th day of the month Adar, and killed 300 men in Susa, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. And so we see, because Esther's willing to stand up, because she is transformed, not only do her people get spared from extermination, but they avenge themselves on their enemies, and they don't just do it on one day, but they do it 2 days in a row. And all of Haman's 10 sons, which I'm glad they died, so I don't have to say their names, they were hanged on that day as well. Now, considering her story, and with the few minutes we have left, when you look at what does she teach us about God's providence and how it leads to our transformation? Any lessons in there about God's providence? Why do you say patience? Yeah. Absolutely. God has his moments, and you have to wait for the right moment to get here. Wait for him to act in his time, which is sometimes the most awful thing that you have to do in the history of the world. wait in his time, because that's how he accomplishes the best result. We can't get ahead of him, because then he can't do what he's planning on doing. We see that in the story. Did you have your hand raised, John? Okay, meek leek. Okay, I thought meekness was not weakness. Sorry, go ahead. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The first two things that I had on here was that God uses our bad choices for his purposes. Even when we make mistakes. That is not to say God wants us to make bad choices. It is to say that he can even take your sordid past and he can use that in a way for his glory, just like he uses Esther. Is it good that she wins this contest and participates in this contest? No, I think that was sinful. But God uses even her sinful action for his glory and for her transformation. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. I think we also learn in this story that God can adjust his plan to our failures. Even though she hesitates, I think, and she doesn't say things the way they're supposed to be said. I don't know what that was. Even though she hesitates, God's plan still works. God is still able to work in his providence to accomplish what he desires. And maybe the main point of all of this is about what Mordecai says. Look, if you fail here, deliverance is going to come from somewhere. The main point is God's going to accomplish his pleasure with or without us. We need to be those who are vessels of his that he can use for his glory. That's what we learn in the story of Esther. All right, thank you guys so much for class. I really did appreciate this study with you.